Have a seat. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Chris, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for all the work you've been doing. He and I talked backstage about the 100th anniversary is coming up and the whole history of the work that has happened here that really is America's history. And I'm very honored to be with you today and everyone here. We have so many leaders. So I want to thank you all for the work you do, and I want to wish you a Happy New Year.
But we never gave up. We never gave in. And we're delivering for the American people now. And now, even our critics have been forced to acknowledge real progress. A record of big accomplishments, matched by few administrations in history. 10 million new jobs, more than we've ever created before at this point in anyone's presidency. 3.5% unemployment rate, near record low in the history of this country. A 15% drop in child poverty compared to 2 years ago.
Breaking news, everybody. Some Americans may have to wait a bit longer than others before they can receive their new fourth stimulus check. The IRS has already confirmed that groups of people will receive larger relief payments than others. These checks may be worth up to $1,000. Now, millions of people are still awaiting their tax refunds from the IRS. However, there is a silver lining. The money may be accruing interest and rates are poised to be jumped in October. And according to its website, the IRS service generally pays interest on refunds that are delayed by more than 45 days after the filing deadline. Interest rates are adjusted every quarter depending on the federal short-term rate, and the IRS announced this week that the current interest rate is 5%, but is slated to increase to 6% on October 1st. Still, there is a downside, which is that the interest paid by the IRS is taxable. The U.S. Government Accountability Office reported that the IRS interest payments surged 33% in the fiscal year 2021, with the tax collecting agency paying out nearly $3.3 billion for individual returns. If you are still waiting for your refund, you can track its status using the IRS Where's My Refund tool. As of late May, the IRS still had roughly 21 million paper returns that still needed to be processed. That is a 7% increase from the same time last year, when there were 20 million unprocessed paper returns. Economists have stated, unfortunately at this point the backlog is still crushing the IRS, its employees, and most importantly taxpayers. These processing delays are creating unprecedented financial difficulties for millions of taxpayers and outright hardships for many. Although more than 90% of taxpayers submitted their returns electronically last year at the request of the IRS, some 17 million sent paper filings, exacerbating the pileup of returns. It is disproportionately older Americans who filed their returns via mail. In a statement, the IRS disputed the tax figures presented by the National Taxpayer Advocate, suggesting the actual backlog is closer to 19 million, down slightly from last year's level. The heap of unprocessed returns stemmed from crisis-related disruptions, including a worker shortage, the task of administering millions of stimulus checks, and adapting to other tax changes and the different relief packages, like boosted child tax credit payments. I also know many of you are wondering where your tax refund money is. It's a question so many have asked weeks after Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb signed a bill that would give taxpayers a refund. For months now, we've all dealt with higher prices and it has not been fun. State lawmakers say they hope a new round of checks and tax refunds approved in a bill that passed during last month's special session can help a little bit.
Congress a few years ago mandated that states would have a wildlife action plan. In our state, in Missouri, we have great outdoor recreation, we have great hunting, we have great fishing. For a long time, one of the oldest and most successful conservation commissions in the country was funded just by hunting and fishing licenses. Our state added 40 years ago a sales tax for conservation and parks. I don't know any state that's done a better job trying to fund its own efforts for conservation, but the congressionally mandated state wildlife action plans, effort to be sure that we don't have things moved to the endangered species list. For that plan to be successful, we need more than the amount of money that Missourians have been able to dedicate to that. Senator Heinrich and I introduced the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. Under that act, Secretary, you'd be in charge of implementing the act, and the act is designed to help for the states to be able to mandate their own state wildlife action plans. how large a role do you see for your department in trying to tell the states what they need to do as opposed to implementing the funding that this act would provide?
Thank you, Senator, for the question, and thank you so much for your efforts to conserve our country's wildlife. And of course, I feel very confident and grateful to my team at Interior because we want to be able to work with everyone to make sure that we are achieving our goals. I could say that the Fish and Wildlife Service would help prevent the need to list species, for example, recover these species expeditiously. We could amplify partnerships, support conservation on private lands, leverage money, and so forth. I feel that one of our strengths at the department is absolutely.
I mean, he was right during COVID, in the dark days of COVID. I just don't see it though. And so what Tom is saying is, well, the market can go higher as long as we know when the Fed's going to stop. But when the Fed is telling us they need months and months of data, and we have not been in this inflationary environment in decades. So anyone going back and saying, when you look back at previous Fed hikes, if you're talking about the 2000s, throw that out the window. And so you have the consumer is slowing, which is 70% of the GDP. GDP is slowing. The Fed is tightening into a slowing, stalling economy. And guess what, Scott? We have QT starting next week. And so I just don't see how we have this V-shaped rally over the next 4 months to end where we started in January, just because the ingredients aren't here. Because also, you think about this, Jay Powell, every single word was scripted. When he's using words like pain, that's a very specific word. He's trying to tell us and tell the market and tell the Americans what is to come. And so if we are going to have a recession sometime in 2023, I also don't think the market will whistle past the graveyard and just race to 4,800. So I think Tom is great. I get what he's saying. I read his research. I just think we're going to be in a much choppier market. The trend lines on the S&P and the NASDAQ, we are making lower highs and lower lows. That has to reverse first of all, and that we're going in the wrong direction right now. So I'm in the camp that we are going to chop along this until we get nicely over the 200-day moving average. I don't think we're even close to start moving in the direction that Tom's talking about.
I'm going to distill what you just said, Bryn, as I throw it back to you again for a follow-up of 4 words. Don't fight the Fed. That's exactly what you're saying. Yep. That's essentially what you're saying.
I am saying that, yes. I mean, we've written multiple pieces. I've said it all year long.